You are listening to the Vincast, Australia's premier wine podcast. Now, if you missed the last episode, number 82, you missed a fascinating chat with Viv Thompson, owner and proprietor of Best's Wines in Great Western, Victoria. You also missed the opportunity to hear how you could win one of 6 bottles of the Best's Bin O Shiraz 2014, retail price of $85, generously donated by the winery. It's very easy to do. All you need to do is promote that particular episode of the Vincast and get as much support as you can. Now, you can do it by social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, making sure that you tag Best's Wines and the Intrepid Wino. You can do it on your blog or website, or why not go to the iTunes page for the Vincast, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a 5-star rating and a review, making sure to mention that episode and Best's Wines. Now, I've actually extended the time that you can actually enter that competition until 31st of March 2016. And of course, remember that every single like, retweet, and share you get of that post improves your chances of getting one of those bottles of amazing Shiraz wine. Thank you very much, Best, for kindly donating the bottles. Thank you, of course, to Viv for his time on the podcast, and to Kathy Lane and the lovely people at Fireworks PR. And thank you for listening to the Vincast. On episode 83 of the Vincast, I chat with Amanda Barnes, a wine journalist originally from England. Based in South America, she is one of the foremost authorities on South American wine and is about to embark on a journey around the world in 80 harvests. Hello there, Vincasts, and welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino. Now, I certainly do appreciate everyone who's been jumping onto the various social media channels and promoting both myself and the podcast and my YouTube channel, the Let's Taste videos. It's been really fantastic to have so many new supporters. And it's been great to have people leaving reviews on the iTunes page for the Vincast, including Linus from the Hillsville Hotel, who gave it a 5-star rating and a really lovely review. I do encourage you to go and check that out. And whilst you're there, why not subscribe and leave a review of your own? I also love getting feedback. You know, all that support is great feedback for me to, I guess, give back to the listeners and the viewers and the readers, and you know, I can purposely design, you know, what I'm talking about, who I'm talking to actually to give you, you know, what you'd like to hear. It's also great to actually have people reach out and be interested in being involved, whether it's by, you know, giving me a couple of bottles of wine for me to taste on my YouTube channel, or indeed, if you'd like to be on the Vincast. And that's what my guest for this week did. Amanda Barnes is originally from Hampshire in England, but she's been living since 2009 in South America, and is one of the sought-after wine writers and food writers and travel writers based there, with specific expertise in that region. And she got in contact with me because she actually is running a Kickstarter for her project that's about to start, called Around the World in 80 Harvests, and she wanted to tell me all about it and talk about her background. So I was very happy to invite her on, and we had a really great chat via Skype, and you can actually listen to it right now, but I'll see you on the other side. Amanda, thank you very much for joining me today, this morning there, this evening here on Skype. I believe you're in London?
I'm in Hampshire, which is just south of London. It's one of the new areas for sparkling wine in England.
Yeah, I've heard lots about that. I'm yet to taste any of the English sparkling wines. I've heard they're very good.
It is very good. Unfortunately, we don't let many of them get out of the country.
Oh, it sounds like Portuguese wine.
Yeah, we're very, after consuming everyone else's wine, we're very we like to keep hold of our own a bit too much. But no, the sparkling wines are great, and there's a lot made in the south of England. So the kind of chalk basins that we have, or below London and to the west of London. And I'm based in a place called Hattingley, which when I grew up here, it's a hamlet of 5 houses. And no one ever heard of Hattingley. So I would always say Winchester, which is the city I'm closest to.
Mm-hmm.
But now there's a vineyard on my road, so it's now called Hattingley Valley, and it's a wine region. So that's a rather exciting advancement in the area.
And when did you sort of start first getting into wine? Like, can you remember if there was a particular moment or a particular wine that you encountered that kind of made you get a lot more interested in wine and think about pursuing it more?
It's been really gradual for me. My parents have always had wine on the table, so I've always, tried and drunk a little bit of wine as a child. And as a teenager, I worked in restaurants as a waitress. And so, just gradually grew into wine, and very much from a food perspective too. I have a big appetite for different foods and love trying different flavors. And so wine all became part of that. It was really perhaps when I went to South America in 2009 that wine became a stronger focus for me in terms of career and also in terms of interest. I left the UK in 2009 to head to South America after working in the local newspapers here, in order to do a year of freelancing and exploring different areas of writing that I was interested in, which was wine, travel, and food, perhaps the three most interesting and enjoyable parts of journalism. And the first one that I wanted to really explore was wine. And so I went to Argentina, and based myself there for 3 months to learn about wine. Yeah. And it was really there that I started becoming fascinated by the subject, and actually as an industry and as as something a bit more serious than just having a glass. Although, mind you, I still think enjoying wine is one of the most important aspects.
Yeah, I think, working professionally in the wine industry, it's pretty easy to forget about that part. But journalism was sort of your first real passion, apart from just being interested in flavors and food before you actually traveled?
Yeah, absolutely. I studied literature. I've always been interested in reading and writing and communication, and I think I'm just a very curious person. So journalism felt like quite a natural career. I love speaking to different people, interviewing others, learning about different topics, and trying to interpret what I've understood in articles. So journalism is something that became quite clear when I was in my late or mid-teens, as the career that I wanted to work in, and wine came later.
With a particular, you said you studied literature. Did you have any particular areas of literature you were passionate about? Time periods or particular writers?
Yeah, well, I studied a lot of South American literature, which is perhaps
Really?
why I head out there. Yeah, I did a great course at King's College, which was comparative literature, where you study lots of different world literatures. And South America was one of the regions that I picked for my thesis. And I also did Greek literature, and a lot of German literature. So I've always been interested more in the magical realism, and slightly, authors like Kafka would be one of my favorites. And then, coming from the South American discipline, Borges, Garcia Marquez, something a bit fantastical, but with also some gritty reality is what appeals to me in writing.
So modern, postmodern, sort of slightly surrealist type stuff.
Absolutely. But then you also, a lot of ancient Greek literature has that element of the fantastic and the surreal.
Euripides, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And did you kind of think of like literature, particularly reading, from other parts of the world in a way, kind of escaping, and that kind of got you interested in travel as well?
Travel. I mean, travel has always been an interest of mine as well. I mean, I think you escape and you travel through literature, and I think, one of my favorite poems actually discusses your ability to travel without leaving your room. And I think travel for me is a concept which is often more of a mental process because you need to allow yourself to become immersed in something different. And you can do that through reading, you can do that through music, and you can also do that by visiting a place. But I also, unfortunately, I think a lot of people when they travel, they don't really let go and kind of enjoy the new surroundings that they're in. So I think travel is not always a physical process, but a very state of mind. And I think through literature, it's given me the opportunity to travel and explore different places, and that's what really appealed to me.
Well, that's always the distinction that I make between travel and a holiday. Like
Yeah,
when I was on my sort of big trip around the world, and I would tell people, I'm visiting all these different places, mostly visiting wineries. They sort of said, "Oh, that sounds fun. That sounds fun. What a great holiday!" It's like, well, it's not really a holiday. Travel takes work, and you have to plan ahead and that kind of thing.
yeah.
So it is kind of slightly more taxing, certainly mentally and possibly financially as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of my friends actually miss it because I do a lot of travel writing too, and I think they misinterpret it as Amanda's always on holiday. What a great job.
Yeah,
But you're not when you're working and traveling as well in terms of um travel writing, it's a fabulous experience, but you're constantly working, it's mentally very taxing to spend all that time understanding each place where you are and trying to communicate and learn the people and the culture that you're in.
yeah.
But it's a very rewarding experience.
So, apart from the literature, was there anything else that kind of got you interested in going to South America? That when you first started to I guess get sort of more journalistic experience overseas and start to get interested in wine.
Yeah, I mean the main reasons that I went there really were for these three interests. Travel, which for me was more thinking about the cultural interest that there is in South America. It's still quite off the beaten path, and the culture is very rich and very different to what we often experience in Europe, which is obviously my kind of back garden in terms of location. And so the richness of the cultural experience there attracted me. And then the gastronomy, obviously South America has this amazing boom in their cuisine. And so I really wanted to explore those flavors. And then the wine was the kind of third part to that. And all of those in some ways had been touched upon in the literature that I'd read. And I think it just felt very exotic for a southern English girl to head off to South America and learn about a whole new place and a different language. And that just really appealed to me when I was in my early 20s
It's a pretty
and
sexy
looking for
part of the world, I
something.
must say.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful and the people are very
The music,
charming and captivating. Yeah, absolutely.
the way people
Um,
interact with each other, the language.
the language, the romance, it's very intense. And it's a very romantic part of the world. You need, as an English girl, and I have lots of Australian expat friends out there too. You need a bit of a break. You need to have a beer and and like step outside for a second and release the intensity because especially in Argentina, people are very passionate, and if you have relationships out there, it can be quite tricky and demanding at times. That Latin passion is really
Everything's up to
very
11.
strong. Everything's late and yeah, but it's
Yeah,
good fun. It's a
I
great
kind
place to
of
explore.
I had that experience to a certain extent when I was an exchange in Japan. It was so kind of liberating just to hang out with my Australian friend and be able to
Mm,
speak English and understand each other's references and stuff like that.
yeah,
It's the same. Like again, whilst I was traveling, you'd kind of every so often you'd meet an Australian and you'd kind of go, oh, it's kind of nice
yeah,
for people to be able to get my jokes.
yeah. It is, and it's funny because it's nice to be outside of your home, but you also need those moments where you can just be yourself and not have to slow down and explain it in a different way.
So, what were the first experiences when you first went there? Like, how did you find it? Like, I'm sure it was it. Did you experience much of a culture shock?
No, actually, it was surprisingly gradual. Like when I first went to Brazil and spent some time with my friend who actually had this Brazilian boyfriend, spent most of the time with him. So I spent the majority of my time with her dad, who was, in his 50s, and we had very similar tastes. So we'd go out and drink whiskey, eat steak tartare, and smoke cigars. And so I had this very relaxed time in Brazil and like listening to bossa nova. And then traveling through was a lot more intense because that was much more, seeing a bit more of the culture and being in more remote places. But then when I landed in Buenos Aires, it's got a slightly European feel. And so there is, you do have these things that connect you to your previous experiences. And people are the same in every country, really, because at the end of the day, everyone invites you round for a barbecue and you have a nice conversation, whether it's in their language or a different language. You're just trying to communicate one to one and have a nice time with each person. It really wasn't as shocking as I think a lot of people are concerned before they go that it will be. I fell into it quite easily. And Mendoza, when I got there to the wine region, it's got quite a small town feel, so it's very easy to navigate. And people are quite open to, they're just as interested in you as you are in them, in the sense that you've both got different experiences that you want to share and learn about each other's culture.
Mm.
So it's not been shocking. I mean, it might be different if I jumped straight into somewhere more into the depths of Colombia, which has a much more distinct culture than further down south in the Southern Cone.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were you doing at first? You were working. What kind of writing were you doing?
Well, I started doing freelance travel writing when I write for different travel websites and publications. And then when I got to Mendoza, I started working at a wine magazine there, which is basically a wine and tourism magazine, Wine Republic. It still exists. And so I
What's the
became
audience
editor
for it?
there. It's mainly for tourists in Argentina.
Oh, okay.
So
So it's all in
it's
Spanish?
all in English.
So,
Um,
so
it,
it's for visiting tourists, not for
yeah,
Argentinian tourists.
no, it's for visiting tourists.
Right.
There's a
Okay.
really big wine tourism industry in
Hmm.
Argentina,
Yeah, I know.
especially in Mendoza.
Yeah. Go
Um,
for a bike
and
ride.
so, yeah, well, that's a good experience too, but a bit of a bit of a scary one.
That's what all the
They,
people in the hostels were doing when I was there. I mean, I rented a car and drove around in Mendoza, but
uh,
everyone staying in the hostel would come back, really buzzed, going, "Oh, that was awesome," but I'm so tired from the riding.
yeah, well, that was one way to visit the wineries out there is to get on one of these bike rides, but they're not country lanes. They've got big trucks, so it can be quite scary after you've got to drink wine to get through it, basically.
Hmm.
But it's a lot more organized with kind of tours and there's actually a wine bus that goes around hopping between different wineries, which is quite fun.
That's a great
But
idea.
basically, yeah, it is. It makes more sense.
So do you
Um,
like buy a ticket, like an all-day ticket or something, or is it just a shuttle bus?
yeah. No, it's like an all day ticket,
Okay.
um, where you spend the whole day and it stops off at different wineries and you can pick which ones you hop on and hop off.
Oh,
Um, yeah, it's great. It's called the Bus Vitivinicola if anyone's heading out there, and it goes to two of the main areas, to Luján and Maipú.
hmm. So,
Um,
so you, as far as the travel writing, were you um, being given assignments, or were you just sort of writing about places you were going to and submitting stuff?
Actually, I was really fortunate because a lot of when once I started writing out there for some different publications, kind of different other publications started approaching me, knowing that I was editing the wine magazine and living out there. So then some wine publications would get in touch and say, I really need this piece on the top winemakers in the area. Can you do it? And so it was a nice place to be because a lot of interesting work came to me as being a local specialist there. And then I started spending a lot of time in Chile as well, and so developed my career a bit more there as well.
Had you visited wine regions before going to South America?
No, it was my first. Part of the reason I chose to like live in Argentina was I wanted to live in a producing country,
Hmm.
and I could have obviously gone and spent time in neighboring France or even the US, but I wanted to try or Australia, but I wanted to try somewhere that was New World, which I believed they would be a bit more open to open to kind of talking and having people visit them and sharing their secrets.
Hmm.
And I wanted to go to a country which perhaps was a bit more off the beaten track. I spoke a little bit of Spanish, and so thought that it'd be good fun to try out in South America. And I think it was a really great decision because everyone in Argentina, they're certainly very excited to let the winemaker will spend the day with you and show you everything that they've been making in the winery. You can taste straight from the tanks and the barrels and spend time with the winemaker, who is often the agronomist as well, or if not the agronomist, out in the vineyards. And so it was the best form of education for me because I'd spent so much time, long days with these people who were so kind and generous with their knowledge, just teaching me through. And I loved it, and I still, that's my favorite thing to do, is spend a lot of time in the vineyards, in the winery, and just learning straight from the experts because that huge field of knowledge that they have, you can only really grasp it once you're there with them. And everyone in Chile and Argentina have been fabulously open about sharing that information. I've spent considerable time in different wine regions since, and every time I go on holiday, I hunt down a wine region there. So when I went on a holiday for my friend's wedding in India, I went and Googled it and said, okay, to my boyfriend, we've got to go. There's a wine region. We're going to catch a train and we're going to go visit these wineries for a couple of days. And I've always done that. So now I've got a perspective of different places as well. But Argentina and Chile really has been my learning ground, and it's a beautiful place to learn.
I guess that was interesting, speaking for myself, because I come from a wine producing country and,
Mm.
my early education, of course, was about Australian wine. And then, I started to learn about wines from other parts of the world. So everywhere I traveled, a lot of the time the perception was based on my experience or what it was like in Australia. And
Mm.
certainly, I think I'm glad that I went to North America and South America first before Europe because it was sort of interesting to compare parts of the New World to the Old World. But I guess it would have been interesting, kind of that first introduction being South America because it's this kind of interesting place between Old World and New World because wine's been
Yeah.
produced there for the better part of 200 odd years.
Or
Uh,
500.
yeah, 200 plus. Um,
Yeah.
um, but the real boom has been in the last 20 or 30 years. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of, and that probably is being reflected in the enthusiasm and the openness of the producers there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, England, growing up in England, we're a big wine drinking country. So, we don't have much of a wine production here, and even the sparkling wine is quite a new development and very niche. So you don't get exposure to production here, which is why going to producing countries is the best way. But in Chile and Argentina, what's beautiful? Well, they're both quite different countries in terms of wine. I mean, Argentina has this long history, and they've stayed connected to making wine throughout the generations. So you speak to a lot of people, especially in Mendoza, which is the main wine region, where 85% of the wine comes from this region. And most people have memories of picking grapes in the vineyards with their grandparents or one of their uncles having a winery and making wine. So a lot of people do have this old connection, which is a bit more a cultural connection to the wine. Whereas in Chile, it really grew as an industry in the last 20 and 30 years. And very few people have that, ancestral connection to winemaking. So you can see the differences where in Chile, they've modernized very quickly and they have, quite big production in some wineries are they're huge. They're Goliath style wineries,
Mm.
um, but they're learning the culture of wine more as drinkers, and now it's become more popular in their capital city, Santiago. Everyone's starting to become a wine lover, whereas in Mendoza in Argentina, people already think they're a wine guru because they've grown up with this culture, so they already think they know a lot about wine, and they're quite passionate about it. But they're beginning to try and look to the world of wines and understand those. So they're two really interesting complementary countries, which are just very different from your experience in the old world. Because of course, when you visit wineries in France, they do things because that's what their parents have done and their grandparents have done, and that's always the way it's been done. And so it's not as questioning as you find this kind of childlike curiosity in some of the newer world wine regions, where everyone's just out to learn, and they want to know why they're doing this, and what works best and who's doing what. So it's a really unique experience, and I can't wait to come out to Australia and see what it's like there as well.
One of the interesting things I found about the difference between Chile and Argentina, at least from my perception, was that Argentina is a big wine consuming country, whereas Chile
Yeah.
has only recently started to get a little bit more into wine. So the majority of the wine produced in Chile, from my understanding, is being exported, whereas only even though Argentina exports a lot, it's only a fraction of what they're actually producing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, wine, people do, there's a much bigger domestic consumption in Argentina. And that probably goes with all the steak that they eat too. I mean, it's kind of
Oh, the
obligatory to have
steak.
a
Oh, the
a
steak.
bottle of Malbec there with the nice Argentinian beef. So Argentina, they do drink a lot of wine. In Chile, people, unfortunately, there's the big piscola tradition, which is mixing pisco with
Ugh.
Coca-Cola.
And
But
Peruvian
there
pisco
is
is much better anyway.
well, oh, yeah, oh, you're very controversial. A lot of Chileans would disagree.
Well,
There are
Chileans are
some
very proud
beautiful,
people, I found.
there are some very beautiful Chilean piscos,
Oh, I
actually.
didn't find any when I
Um,
was there.
oh, you need to come back and visit. But Chile, I mean, what's really interesting about Chile is that it is this new wine drinking culture. I mean, they have historically made artisanal home wine, and they have some vines that are really old. So they were actually the first point for planting vines when the Spanish missionaries came through.
Hmm.
They were planting more from the ports of Chile. So they have vines. You find a lot of old vines in the south of Chile. In fact, the oldest Malbec vines in South America are most likely in Chile, just in the Atata, Biobío region.
Hmm.
And so they have these beautiful old vines, and there's this kind of lost world down there around Maule as well, which is fascinating because people have lived, in their gardens. They've got these vineyards and these, century or more old vines, and they've always just sold them for the industry. Since the industry started paying more money than making it for yourself. But now that there's this whole rediscovery going on in Chile, and a lot of value being put on these old vines, and working on the wine culture in Chile. It's an exciting place to be at the moment in terms of wine because everyone's exploring into different areas. They're rediscovering old methods that they used to use. There's a great producer there called De Martino, and the winemaker Marcelo Retamal. He uses a lot of old,
Tinyaja.
exactly, the tinajas,
I
and
love that
starts
stuff.
using, the clay amphora again, and there's some producers in Chile which still use Chilean cow hides. They still use leather to store their wine. So there
Like in
is,
bladders.
yeah.
Wow.
So there is this interesting looking back towards the past and trying to bring it forward again, and reclaim their roots in wine. Whereas Argentina, the roots have always remained intact. So it's less of a fight.
How do you kind of compare Argentina and Chile as far as um, the kinds of, I guess, people or families or businesses that would establish kind of wineries and make wine? Because the way I kind of saw it was that historically in Chile, wealthy families
Mm,
look to Europe to kind of as a reference for how people like how wealthy families would show their wealth, and they would buy estates and plant vineyards and build these big chateaus, and that's kind of why there were some big vineyards and beautiful old houses, particularly in the Maple. Whereas I found Argentina was a slightly more agricultural kind of farming sort of like particularly in Mendoza. Is
yeah.
that kind of right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, it probably all started in quite a similar vein where people had their own, their own vineyards in their garden, and that still exists in both countries. But in terms of the way that the industries have developed, Chile is kind of notorious for having this very small, concentrated elite, which is beginning to dissipate a bit now with the kind of political changes over the last couple of decades, really. But there is a huge concentration of wealth in very few families in Chile who own, who have major control over a lot of the land in the country, and also some of the most important industry. And so there are a lot of the wineries are actually, owned by these top families. And if not, there's a lot owned by big corporations. But there is this new vein, and it's not that new relatively. Perhaps it's just kind of coming more to light now. This vein of smaller producers, and there's this whole movement in Chile known as MOVE, which is the movement of independent vintners, which is where a lot of winemakers have broken off from their kind of their job as a winemaker and have actually started making their own wines, which is something that was frowned upon by the industries for a while because, the winemaker shouldn't be heard or seen, or it was never supposed to be a rock star in Chile. The winemaker was, the worker, and it was the family that should be well known by the press and
Yeah.
that should kind of garner all the attention. So this kind of movement has shaken up the industry now, and people are putting a bit more focus on their their producing hands and the people who are actually working on the wines. And it's becoming a bit easier in Chile to have a small production. And also, I think the markets outside, everyone grew bored of getting that kind of cheap, good value, but at a low price point, and very similar style wines. And now people want to try something unique from Chile. And obviously, the whole natural wine movement, which is growing everywhere. It's considerably big in Chile, considering its past and its size, more so than in Argentina. Whereas Argentina does have this more, family farm style history, like you said, where a lot of the producers, they're families that have been producing wine for decades and generations,
More
and
European.
whether more European in style, absolutely. I mean, it was the Italians really that started
Mm.
that that kind of style of business there, and they've got a long history of workers being able to start buying their first couple of rows, and then moving on to having their own land, and that was always the aspiration in Argentina, was to grow, to get the money to buy your own land, to start your own business and production, and that kind of remains today. Chile's much more conservative, and it's taking a longer time to come out of that. But you've got to think that they were in a dictatorship only within living memory. So
Yeah.
it's not. It just takes time to move out of those systems,
And the
there have
status
been.
quo aren't exactly about to, let go of a lot of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're not going to get a revolution from the top. So, but I don't. There's Chile is one of the most organized countries in South America. It's one that does really well, and continues to grow, and people. As far as I understand, they seem to, be gaining a bit more independence and power. And I think it will be a more gradual shift, but I'm not sure whether a huge revolution would be the most productive way to do that. I think
I
it's
feel like that's come about because there's a lot more, young, particularly young Chileans traveling, whereas I found that Argentinians, like particularly, even a few years ago, I didn't encounter many Chileans whilst I was traveling, but I did meet in Europe, particularly in Spain, a lot of Argentinians, young Argentinians who were like traveling and working in Spain.
yeah. I mean, Argentina is to try and talk about Argentinian politics would take all afternoon, but they have at this glory period where 1 peso was $1, and so everyone took the opportunity to go out and travel. Obviously, when kind of the reality that the government were hiding hit and the peso devalued significantly, that kind of has put a stop on travel. And I think you'll find nowadays that it's much harder for Argentinians to travel because the Argentinian currency is so weak compared to any currency at the moment. And so you'll probably find that there are more Chileans traveling at the moment than Argentinians because
Mm.
they're in a much stronger economic position.
And that's giving them an
Um,
opportunity to kind of interact with people around the world and kind of get exposed to other cultures and other ways of working. And hopefully they can bring back some of the positive things they learned to Chile and
yeah.
work at how they can improve things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's happening already. And we also see that very much in the wine industry too. I mean, the big differences in the last kind of 10 years in Chile, the winemakers have been encouraged. It was always the families that were traveling to promote their wine. But now, the winemakers are also encouraged to go out and learn and work promoting the wines too, but also, to learn from other places and try and bring back some of that knowledge to improve their own wines and situation in the country.
So how's your like life and writing and career kind of changed over the last 5 or 6 years in South America?
Well, it's just been kind of growing in that sense. The big change for me was once I'd spent a solid 3 years in Argentina, I started to focus a lot more on Chile too. So that was great in terms of opening up to another wine production country and spending time there. And now my life is very much spent between the both of them. So I spend a lot of time in the Andes, whether that's at the customs queue waiting to get through or up in the air looking down. But I spend a lot of time between each country and I regularly write for different books and also magazines and newspapers. So it's just kind of grown in terms of having an expertise in both countries, which has been really enjoyable, and that's been my niche. And now I'm really keen to explore different areas. And I've always, while I've been in South America, I've been trying to tap into the other wine productions there. Uruguay is one country that I've visited a couple of times, and that has an interesting wine production, very small but quite unique,
Tanat.
and a lot of Tanat, exactly, but also a lot of coastal whites coming out now, which I think will be something exciting for the future.
I tasted
And
a really
then,
amazing Gewürztraminer from Uruguay a few years ago.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I think it was
yeah,
Gewürz.
well they have. I mean, they have some of in terms of with whites, they haven't necessarily gone down the very typical Sauvignon Blanc Chardonnay route.
Thank
There's a lot of
goodness.
yeah, it makes it more interesting. They've got, a bit of Albarino coming out, and it could be quite, I think because they're not limited by anything, and no one's going to the shops to buy a Uruguayan white wine. It gives them a bit more freedom to play. So we'll see what happens. It's still kind of in baby steps. The red wine is really what they focus on, but I think there'll be something unique coming out quite soon. And also, there's one producer who's kind of trying it out with slightly more aged, oxidized style wines, which is kind of it's nice for that area of the world to have something. There's a lot of tourism money in Uruguay too, so they've got a big opportunity to sell their wine right there on their doorstep. A lot of cruise ships come in, and so it's quite a buoyant industry, a small one but buoyant.
One of the things I found really interesting was in Chile and Argentina was from my perspective the lack of Spanish varieties.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like possibly in a naive way, I kind of thought that there would be more Spanish varieties because I would have figured that Spanish migrants and missionaries and
Mm.
would have brought Spanish vines with them. But also, I don't know, like I felt like Chile and Argentina, and at that point I hadn't actually been to Spain yet, but I kind of my perception was that the climate and the nature of the land had more in common with Spain than it did with France, where
Mm.
the majority of the varieties seem to come from. Do you
Yeah.
have anything to
I mean,
comment on that?
when the vines were originally planted, I mean, the biggest one that was planted everywhere was the Mission grape, the Criolla. And some of the older varieties from Spain, or also more the Mediterranean varieties. You've got old vines of that, especially in Chile, that people are working with now.
That's
But
good.
that yeah, and it's really exciting. I mean, one of the kind of popular wines at the moment is Carignan. You've got a lot of Carignan in Maule in the south, and also some nice old Tempranillo vines. A lot of Muscat is being made down there, and so there's a more unusual mix of grapes happening in the south of Chile. And in Argentina, most of the Criolla grapes have kind of been, they get chucked into the bulk wine, which goes, in the box at the bottom of the supermarket shelf. But some of them have been looking a bit more at the old vines that they have, and working a bit more with that. And obviously, the most important white variety for Argentina is Torrontés, which is their own native mix, which came from Muscat de Alejandra and Criolla. And so, that's, I mean, it's not to be confused with the Spanish Torrontés. It's a different grape, but that's got a bit more identity in that area, and is a grape really suited to Argentina's terrain.
Hmm.
But it was basically
Particularly in
this kind of
Salta.
sweet, particularly in the north, yeah. But this sweep of Cabernet Sauvignon and what sells best, and working on the French varieties kind of took over both countries.
Hmm.
But now you've got more plantings. People are starting to look at Garnacha, and try and go for a bit more of those Mediterranean varieties and see how they work. We won't really be
Monastrell. I think
tasting.
Monastrell would be really good in
Yeah,
Mendoza.
there's absolutely. There's one producer there's one producer in Argentina starting to work a lot with Monastrell, and also in Chile. So we'll see. I mean, they're being planted now, so it's going to take a couple of years for it to
Sure.
come to light and for the experiments to kind of make right. But I think it's something that a lot of wine critics from outside would come and say, "Well, hang on a second, why are you doing this?
Hmm.
why don't you start focusing on what would suit your climate best?" But also, the climate has changed dramatically, and it will continue to change. So finding the right site within the country is really important.
Well, it's the same
And
discussion. Sorry. Uh,
yeah,
it's the same discussion that's going on in Australia as far as climate change and finding the right varieties that are suitable for the climate and for the terroir.
yeah,
And that's why what we consider to be more alternative varieties are being planted, Italian varieties, Spanish varieties, Portuguese varieties. And no doubt, it's happening in North America. It's possible it's happening in South Africa, but that kind of learning about that is sort of what you're hoping to do in the near future. Am I correct?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, what, in terms of Chile and Argentina, or me?
No, in terms of 80 harvests
Yeah.
around the world.
What I would like to do is kind of, my upcoming project is called Around the World in 80 Harvests,
Mm,
which is a plan to visit within 2 years some of 80 of the most important and significant, but also some of the most interesting wine regions around the world, and discover what makes each of them unique, and document the harvest and speak to the experts and producers there, and really show all these places, and bring them to life through video and articles, and a lot of live streams and interactive webinars that people can participate in, and kind of look at each terroir, if you like, and see what makes it very special and what makes it interesting and different to what else is being offered. So with that, we'll be visiting 42 countries over all the 6 continents that produce wine and 80 regions. So it should be a really interesting experience.
Where did you get the idea for the project?
Well, I mean, I've just always, throughout my wine education, just been really interested in all the different regions in the world, and queried like, oh, do they make wine? Do they make wine in India when I went there? And oh, I wonder if they make wine in Namibia. And so, I've always just been very curious about where each place produces wine and what they're known for. And I think, in a lot of the wine education books that you'll study from, they're very useful and great, but it's difficult to get some of that, lively information that makes it a bit easier to learn. I want to see videos and I want to hear an interview from the producer about it. And I want to have consistent information about each of these regions. And I found that when I had this idea, like, well, wouldn't it be great to do, a big documentary about where the world of wine is in 2016, 2017, in order to kind of put it in context of right now, because the world of wine is changing so quickly that in 10 years, I'm sure it's going to be a very different wine map that we're looking at. And I was talking to Jancis Robinson, who's one of the authors of the Wine Atlas, and she just says the rate that the Atlas of wine is changing, it is just, it's amazing. And it's going to, you've really got to take inventory of where it is right now. So that's what I'm really interested in doing is bringing all that information and creating a consistent database for each place. A lot of wine books, and I write for some of them too, and you'll see that they've got this huge section on France. But when it comes to some of the New World countries, it can be, sometimes just a shameful paragraph. And so the idea is to create, a database of each region with the same consistent information about, the soil, the climate, all those different facts that, we find interesting in terms of learning about wine, and make sure that it's available and accessible for everyone, whether you're a wine professional or a wine lover who just wants to have a good glass of wine and understand a bit of where it comes from and the culture and the gastronomy that accompanies it.
When you were just talking about, parts of the world that have hardly anything referenced in books, it reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. When they talk about Earth, there's one entry just says harmless, and then they change it to mostly harmless. So how are people kind of engaging with your journey? Is it just yourself who's going to be traveling, or are you going to be joining up with people along the way, or is the idea to be visiting places during the harvests?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent the best part of last year organising the diary so that I can reach each region during harvest time. Obviously, that will be down to the whim of nature, because sometimes, as we all know, harvests come early and sometimes they come late. But the idea is to reach each region during harvest so that we can get like footage of what's happening and the buzz in the vineyards and in the winery at that time. And I'll be accompanied on each leg by different photographers from the regions, because I want it to be a really collaborative project. So as well as, the photographers who'll be able to interpret each place through their own kind of creativity and lens, we'll also be speaking to all the different experts in that region and the producers. So the idea is to create like a big wine community that people can participate in and learn from all these and connect and learn with all these people in each region. And it's a really interactive journey. The idea is not just to be, kind of writing about what we see there, but also letting people participate through live video streams in the vineyards and, walking through the winery and tasting the barrels, and people can be asking questions and directing those to the winemaker. And also we're going to be doing some webinars and hot topics in each region. So the first leg that we kick off with is well, actually next week I'm flying out to Peru, where we start with the first harvests in South America. And so, I mean, Peru is a good example because we'll be visiting not only some producers in Ica, which is the main wine region there, because they also make wine as well as pisco. And so we'll also be meeting some of the kind of top. I'm meeting with a chef from Central, which is it's now I think it's number 3 in the world in restaurants, and so we'll be talking a lot about Peruvian gastronomy and pairings. So it'll be like a very round adventure with kind of cultural and gastronomy tips as well, but very much focusing on the harvest and the action in the vineyard and learning about that place and that particular terroir without using that word too often.
So people who are following the journey can feel like they're traveling, they're escaping, just like you did when you were, reading the books written by authors
Absolutely.
around the world.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
how can people actually support this project, this incredible 2-year project?
Well, at the moment we're on Kickstarter. So the idea, is for people to support the Kickstarter campaign because the whole access to the journey will be through subscription basis. So at the moment on Kickstarter, it's the equivalent of £30 for the 2 years for the digital magazine. So each month we produce a digital magazine, and they can also get access to the website, which will have the video interviews and articles and a gallery of photos. And then if they want to step up to the pro package, which is £90, that's access for 2 years to the webinars and to the live video streams and to being able to interview the producers yourself. So the pro package is really for those who are, serious wine buffs or work in the industry. And then, for the casual kind of wine lover who just wants to catch up in the evening with a glass in their hand and read their magazine, then there's a lot there for them too. So it's all on Kickstarter. And then afterwards, when we finish the Kickstarter, which will be at the end of March, then it will be only subscription based through the website.
And that's ongoing, how people could support the project.
Yeah, absolutely. But the best deal is now because it's going to be discounted for everyone that supports early on Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm. So is all that information via one website? Can people find it via your website?
Yeah, absolutely. And they can visit the landing page, which is easy to remember. It's 80harvests.com or around the world in 80harvests.com. Mm-hmm. Or they can also, and through there, they can access the Kickstarter page. And you can also see a nice interview with Jancis Robinson.
Great. And as far as people following you on social media platforms?
Yeah, we've just launched our social media. So on Twitter, we're at 80harvests. Instagram is also at 80harvests. And then my own, I'm Amanda Barnes with an E, but I'm Amanda Tweeter on Twitter and Amanda Wine on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, Amanda, I really appreciate you getting in contact with me and jumping on Skype today and sharing your story and your perspectives on South America, and then the amazing journey you have ahead of you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And of course, thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and as always, you can follow myself on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Intrepid Wino, and the podcast is on Twitter at the Vincast. Head to facebook.com/Intrepid Wino and hit that like button on the Facebook page, and do the same thing pretty much on the Intrepid Wino YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, and why not watch some of the Let's Taste videos on there. I would love for you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, or countless other different ways of listening to and downloading podcasts. And if you do that, please take 5 minutes just to leave a rating of 5 stars, ideally, and a review of the podcast as well. Of course, you can find out all that information as well as different ways you can get in contact with me and provide me with some feedback at intrepidwino.com. And don't forget to promote episode 82 of the Vincast with Viv Thompson from Best Wines for your chance to win one of those bottles of the best Bin O Shiraz 2014. And remember that you have until March 31st to promote it as much as you can. As always, I am glad to have you on board. I look forward to you listening to the next episode of the Vincast. But until then, bye.